We'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting for June 26th. We'll have a roll call, please.
Mr. Lear,
Present.
Mr. Legess,
Present.
Mr. Washington,
Present.
Mr. Olthoff, Mr. Hess, Mr. Byrne,
Present.
Ms. Weber, Mr. Payton, Ms. Parker, Mr. Kinzinger, Mr. Zenz, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Ms. DiColo,
Present.
Mr. Dennell, Mr. Wheeler,
Present.
Mr. Seroy.
Present.
We have a quorum.
I have no request for public comment. Are there any requests for public comment? Hearing no request, we'll move on. We have no presentations today. You've received the May 29th minutes. Do we have a motion to approve those? Mr. Byrne, second by Mr. Hess. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We'll move to the Finance Department. Mr. McCarty. You have in your packet the miscellaneous finance reports, so you can begin to examine those. Morning.
Good morning. First item, we have the regular monthly updates, the bed rental, sales tax, use tax, excuse me, income tax. I don't know if there's any questions. We have the same thing with the horse and
Apparently.
horse. Must be the room. I don't know. I don't know if there's any questions before we move on. I was at a Illinois Department of Revenue training a week or so ago, and they handed out some trend information, and it just confirmed statewide some of the things that we're seeing is also happening statewide. They're working on their FY20 predictions. They said should be out soon, but there's been a positive trend in most things across the state, so we're also benefiting from that. So I don't know if there's any specific questions. I won't spend a lot of time on this.
Are there any questions? There are slight dips here, are there not, in terms of the report for May?
There is the sales tax dipped a little bit.
Income tax a little.
Income tax, yeah. The last month was such a large amount, so we'll continue to watch the trend, overall, to see how we do experience those through various times throughout the year. So we'll just have to see. According to the state, everything's trending positively, so we'll see 1 month fluctuation versus total trends.
If there are no questions on finance reports, we'll move to cash flow update.
I will let Nick discuss what he's transacted here this morning, but I can officially tell you we're through the roughest part of our cash flow year, so that's good news there. So I've got the update for you through May with some updated estimates through June, and also through November of 2019. And we talked last month, everything's going good, but we may still have to it may take a little bit of time, for interfund borrowing, and then we had a discussion, potential discussion about TAWs. What I wanted to do today is just share a little bit of insight into what I'm looking at, into the window that I'm looking at. If you take the estimated November 19 ending cash balance of 8.3 million, and then compare that to the ending on the November of 18 report, which should be potentially on the back side of that page, 5.6. That's a $2.6 million change from year to year. estimated. That's where we're looking at the possibility. That's where I'm exploring the possibility, since we're 2.6 million higher, that we may not need a TAW next year. So there's a lot left to watch, and watching the trend, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a insight into the window I'm looking into. We also need to take in consideration all of our insurance changes, potential changes, renewals, and get those plugged in. So there's still a lot of information left to process to know for sure, but I just wanted to give you a little insight into what we're looking at and how we could potentially walk out of that TAW process potentially for next year. So it's still a work in progress, but that's the window that I'm looking at right now, and I wanted to share that with you. And we'll keep an eye on it as the months progress here, as we move forward. So I don't know if there's any questions or not on this, or anything else on these 2 pages here for cash flow.
Yes, Mr. Wheeler.
Yes. I just wanted to draw attention to the highway payback numbers, July 19 and August of 19. We're taking big chunk of the debt that we have to the highway department on interfund borrowing. So that was a concern for this committee over the years and for highways, because it got to the point where we wouldn't have enough money for the road and bridge projects. So that is starting to go back the other direction. So just want to mention that. It's a big step too. So we're able to do this and also take care of our old obligations. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move to claims recommended or not recommended for approval. You have 4 items that were, the auditor said he would not endorse. Each of these items are within the budget of the existing department, so if there's a motion to recommend approval by the full county board, I would entertain that motion. Mr. Dunhill moves. Mr. Kinzer seconds. Any discussion? Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make an observation on these claims. It seems like they come from the same departments over and over again. Is the auditor communicating with these departments before it comes before our committee? I'm looking at the coroner's request for shirts, uniforms. The coroner's office isn't, in fact, a law enforcement agency, and they go into crime scenes, go into situations where they need to be identified as who they are, and having uniforms per se or identifiable attire is appropriate. So my question is, did the auditor communicate with the coroner's office regarding this rejection? Okay, so, I mean, again, it just seems like it's coming from, the same departments are constantly being scrutinized. That's my observation.
Thank you. Mr. Wheeler?
Just as a matter of a point of fact, the uniforms are part of the contract in many of these collectively bargained agreements with law enforcement. So to question that, I don't quite understand, but.
All right, we have a motion to approve these claims. Let's do a roll call vote on that, please.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mr. Legess. Aye. Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff. Aye. Mr. Hess. Aye. Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Ms. Weber. Aye. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Ms. Haas. Aye. Ms. DeColo. Aye. Mr. Dunnell.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And as is the auditor's practice, he requests that the finance committee make a recommendation to the county board regarding his travel. So we have in the packet a claim for the auditor's travel. Could I have a motion to approve that claim? Mr. Kulo, second by Mr. Payton. Any discussion? All right, that's a claim spending money, so we'll need a roll call vote on that, please.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Ms. Weber. Aye. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Ms. Haas. Aye. Ms. DeColo? Aye. Mr. Dennell? Aye. Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Are there any other questions for Mr. McCarty in regard to the Finance Department? Hearing none, thank you. We'll go to the Treasurer's Office. Mr. Afficano? Good morning.
Morning.
You have the report from the Treasurer's Office in your packet, or they were sent by email, I'm sorry. They were sent by email to you. A motion to approve those would be in order. Mr. Zinn, is there a second? Mr. Byrne, any discussion on the motion to approve? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Well, good morning, everyone. Boy, it feels good to hear that we're crawling out of our financial hole, and I'm happy that I could be a part of that for the last 2.5 years. And I think a lot of that credit goes to this committee. So thank you. Steve is excited this morning because he got $3 million early distribution. We moved it this morning, and the great thing is it wasn't incredibly necessary, but it helps to have it as a pad. But so everything's on track. I noticed this year we have collected more than normal. I can't give you a percentage yet, but we've collected about 105 million, and our levy was about 198. So, you know, there's some non-payment obviously in there, but we wouldn't have collected 198 total. So it was pretty good collection first time. The upside to that is we have 102 million today in a money market fund at 2.32% for until July 19th. So we're hoping we can make some significant interest. July 19th, mobile home bills will go out. That's the next sort of big stop on the calendar. And then September 5th, of course, is the second due date. Everything seems to have run well in this tax collection. Of course, the staff is incredible downstairs. But what we've done differently, we started last year and then improved it this year, was we send weekly envelopes to the banks that are all pre-addressed, pre-stamped, and the banks send us their slips. And there's a date on the back of when that envelope's to go in the mail. So it's much more consistent. So we get those slips consistently. We're still processing some tax slips today, but we'll probably finish today. So everybody will then be posted. That's all I have. I think everything's great. Take any questions?
Mr. Shearer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Nick. With our cash flow situation improving, is that going to allow you to maybe take that money that you're putting in the money market account and extend that?
Well, I hope so. It's always you're walking a fine line. I don't know this for a fact, and this board probably would. Some people on this board would know better than I do. Previous treasurers, as soon as they collected it, distributed it, and that was, I assume, because there was no interest rates at that point. You were 0.2 maybe, and so you're walking a fine line for some of these taxing districts that are being forced to wait longer than they're used to. So I've heard from some people, and of course I'm trying to accommodate those that need help. But the treasurer has 30 days from the last payment date to hold the money and distribute.
That was my next question. If you have a window that you
I
have
do.
to...
I have 30 days, and I have 30 day. Once that 30-day window hits, I then have to distribute every 30 days until tax season ends. But I also don't have to distribute 100% of the money at all times. So typically what I've distributed is 80%. And that way it kind of flattens out the distribution.
Right.
Otherwise, you have a huge spike for first distribution, then it tails off, then you get the second distribution, and then it's very small. This way it just levels it off for over 6 distributions. That's the way I choose to do it. I know some people have some disagreements with that, but as I've said to everybody, if I talk to you on a one-on-one basis and there's a need, we'll see what we can do to help. And I know there was a fire protection district that came to me, and of course we're going to help them, but I'm trying to get the districts accustomed to not seeing their money until July 15th. And, you know, some people want it right away, and all the school districts call me every year and say, please, please, please don't distribute before July 1st.
Yeah.
Right? So everybody has competing interests.
Okay.
My interest, I have a fiduciary obligation to the county and to the taxing districts to make the most interest possible. And that's the one that I'm going to follow.
Well, I appreciate your initiative on that aspect of it.
So hopefully this year, thank you, Mr. Seroy. This year we're looking at maybe $300,000 in interest, somewhere in there. So it's better than a sharp stick in the eye.
Right.
Ms. Weber.
Thank you. I just have a question. So I paid my taxes at State Bank of Herscher, and is that wire transferred to you? And then they also no.
The way that works, Mrs. Weber, is that you bring your slip in there and pay. We then get, and I'm sorry, you are right about the money. The money is what sits in their bank. I then wire it to myself. I go out and grab it through ACH, and then your tax slips are mailed to me from State Bank of Herscher on a weekly basis.
And that's when you record my payment?
And that's when I record your payment, yes. So there's a little bit of a lag, and you know, that's sort of the cost of doing business. We try to have a very little lag. The biggest lag, of course, is at the end of the payment process, because that's when everybody pays. So,
Okay.
but that's how it works.
The date's on it, so there wouldn't be any problem.
No,
The date of payment.
no. As long as it's, you know, as long as the bank won't take your payment late,
Mhm.
and as long as it's postmarked, you're fine. And of course, anecdotally, we see a growth in online payments as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mhm.
oh, I want to mention one last thing. We had talked about the partial payments. There were a few people this year that I dealt with personally that couldn't afford to pay their whole taxes, and they made a partial payment, and that's something we hadn't done in the past. So I was happy we were able to do that, because, you know, I think one woman came in and she was $2,400 and she paid $2,000. So she has a $400 liability as opposed to a $2,400 liability, which I think is a better deal. So, thank you.
Very good. We'll move to the Sheriff's Department. Mr. McCarty, did you want to speak to the issue?
Just real quick, wanted to thank Nick through our one-on-one conversation. Reminded him he worked with us because our first TAW payment is next week. Our obligation for July 5th, so we're going to do that early next week. So he made sure that we had more than enough, you know, available to do that. So he's being a little modest up there, but I do appreciate, you know, him working with us for that.
Sheriff's Department, you have the monthly update in the emails you received. Are there any questions on that monthly update? Mr. McCabe, did you want to speak to anyone?
Unusual, but I don't have much to say, but I'll come up here.
Well, you might get all sorts of questions. Suggest you don't have much, so.
No, about the only thing I have is to touch on the claim for payment that was recommended for denial. Just a little history lesson. It seems like we do this over and over again. For the newer board members, all law enforcement agencies, except for maybe one or two of the smaller ones that didn't wish to participate, are on the same computer system. It's a New World system. Our department manages that. As from a law enforcement standpoint, I can tell you it's a huge advantage because bad guys move around. If I'm in Herscher and I run a guy that's been messing around in Aroma Park. Normally you would have known it, but because we share systems, I can see all the contacts that law enforcement had with these individuals. We now have got fire services on board with that same system. And we were told by our rep that we're the first county in the United States to do that. I don't have any empirical data to prove that, but I'm going to go with what they tell us. And again, the advantage is we draw their information too. It's good for us, it's good for the taxpayers, it's good for our agencies. And part of that commitment is keeping our people trained. And Trent Bukowski, who's our IT director, does a fantastic job. That guy is on call 24/7. He's taking calls when he's in Disney World on vacation, you know, getting into his computer, solving things. He goes to these New World conferences, and I'll go over this again because we went over it before, but they request he gets there a day early so he can sit down with them, and they're trying to pry him on some of the committees to get him even earlier, a day earlier than that. And he meets with New World, and we resolve a lot of the issues. Now, the payback for that is, number one, they cover all his conference costs, which is about $2,000. We cover his lodging and the rest of it. But and number two, they are at our department today installing, I don't want to say an upgrade. I need Kevin here to give me the right terminology, but basically an add-on with training, which would cost us $5,000 if we didn't have this relationship with them. It's costing us and our local taxpayers $0. So I appreciate the job the auditor does. I would just ask again, one simple phone call. I apologize because I feel like we're almost wasting this committee's time. Somebody needs to look over the bills, I get it, but if there's a question, just call and ask. A bunch of emails back and forth, and then you guys dealing with it, it just, you know, time's money. And although thanks to you and the chairman and the sheriff, the county's in a little better financial position, we're wasting time and money by dealing with some of these things. So again, a simple phone call, and we could, and if you don't like the answer, then let's bring it to the committee and say, hey, the sheriff's department's screwing up, and you know, we need to fix it. But you know, Trent will go to the next year's, and or the sheriff will be here again because he went there a day early to meet with them, and you can't get much done during conference because they're doing their conferencing, they're doing their training, and you know, so if anybody has any questions on that, I'd be more than happy to answer.
No questions or any questions on the monthly update? If not, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Okay, well, on the good news front, we hear we've signed cannabis is going to be legal in the state of Illinois here soon, and I've been doing this too long to even start telling you what a bad idea that is, and you know, for our kids, and it's all about the dollar. And now folks are saying, well, it's not about the dollar. Well, yeah, it is about the dollar, and you know, places like Colorado prove for every dollar they make in taxes, they spend for in social services. And I'm a little scared on where this is going. They're infusing beers now with cannabis. What a great idea that is, huh? Not only got Mr. Legess's attention, I think he woke up. He went, whoa, hey. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride in the next few years. Thank you.
We move to the auditor's office. Mr. Lee? You've received that report via email, so if I could have a motion to approve the monthly claims. Mr. Kissinger, a second to approve monthly claims. Mr. Dunhill, any questions on that motion? If not, a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Legess? Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess? Mr. Byrne? Ms. Weber? Mr. Payton? Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz? Ms. Haas? Ms. DeColo? Mr. Dennell? Mr. Wheeler? Motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, what do we have?
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Well, everyone received the email of the report and some of the items that we had comments about. I will say that I didn't catch the beginning of the meeting, but just kind of thinking of some of the comments that are generally made when we have questions about something. You know, we do email the department heads or the elected officials when we have questions about things. And the justification of expenditures, particularly with travel, we believe are on the onus of the individual who does the travel. And if they provide that synopsis up front, I think that would alleviate some of the things that people tend to want to blame our office for in terms of wasting time and such. So that is something that I will comment on that. As far as the other items go, it's pretty straightforward with the bottled water situation. I know there are elected officials, including myself, we pay for that out of our own pocket. There are and other items. So if there are any other questions, I guess I could answer them at this time, but I did want to note those two items.
Are there any questions for the auditor? Mr. Searay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Jake.
Good morning, sir.
In your report, you reference to publications. Can you expand on the reference in your report about the publications and the newspapers subscriptions? Or
Yes, so there was a claim that came through of a subscription to the Daily Journal. We have seen those in the past where individuals have wanted to purchase subscriptions to the Daily Journal, and we just don't believe that that's appropriate. If you have a legal notification that you submit to the Daily Journal, they will provide you with a printed copy of that notification for free and a certificate. And so if that is the reasoning for purchasing a subscription, we don't believe that that's adequate.
okay, I was just wondering if it was a department that maybe had to have things in the newspaper and maybe not just the Daily Journal. There's a lot of other publications that we have to publish things in, and
Correct.
I didn't know if I didn't really know the details, and I just wanted you to expand on that. Just because it's good that nobody's buying the newspaper now. I guess it's in trying not to continue not to buy it. It's going to be something that's going to go along the wayside eventually with the digital thing. But I'm just wondering where your thoughts were with that. And we do have to publish things in the newspaper occasionally.
Correct.
I always like to be able to check and make sure it's because maybe it's not that day or the day after.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And they do provide a certificate because by statute our office has to publish certain items in the newspaper, and they'll provide a sample of the notification, and that's all done as part of the payment for purchasing that legal notification.
Right.
Anything beyond that we believe should be out of someone's pocket, as it comes out of mine and other individuals who have newspaper subscriptions.
Any other questions, comments? If not, thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have a good day, everyone.
We'll move on to other business, the plans for filling the public defender position. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. This is an extension of a conversation at the Criminal Justice Committee where Judge Taylor had notified the committee that it was the intent of the circuit courts to hire a full-time chief public defender. In the past, it's always been part-time, and the amount of caseload, the types of cases, for the myriad of reasons, everybody has the opportunity to watch those committee meetings. They're going to go with the idea, and with my full agreement, that they should have a full-time chief public defender that does nothing else but runs that office. And as I explained to Mr. Lear and to others, that while this committee doesn't need to take any action right now, the action would come with a budget amendment if they hire that person before December 1st, which is probably likely. But it would really be more of a heads up, a chance to ask questions about the thought process. It's another $30,000 a year on top of what we currently pay. The state picks up a large portion of that. Statutorily, they have to be paid a certain amount as compared to the state's attorney, and the state picks up a vast majority of that money. So we just wanted to make sure that this committee knew had the opportunity to ask questions, and it will be built into next year's budget. And if there is anything to clean up as far as this year's budget, we always do those amendments at the end of the budget year. So it's really just, I want to say a head nod, a chance to ask questions, and then we're moving forward that with my recommendation, because we've been talking about this quite a while. The office demands full-time attention, especially with the increased caseload.
Are there questions about this plan? If committee members are clear with the plan and have no comments they want to make, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Mr. Altoff.
Thank you, Chairman. Is the vast majority 51%?
Sorry.
Is the vast majority 51% that they could?
They pay? No,
Yeah.
I think it's, oh, geez. Yes, no, just kidding. I'd have to look at it, but no, it's real. We're spending another 30 grand. I believe we looked this up right now. I believe we're at 60 or 65 now. So yeah, it's a vast majority of the increase they're going to be spending. How about that?
Okay, well, that would be good.
I'm in marketing.
Okay.
I think in probation department,
We get a lot of those in this committee.
I think in probation department, don't they pick up 80%?
Yeah. I apologize.
I think in probation department, don't they pick up 80% of the cost?
For those grant and aid positions,
Yeah.
for probation, yeah.
Grant and aid.
And the increase they got was not for more positions. They just got an increase from the state, which is, will help cover that 20%, so.
No other questions, comments in regard to that plan? You have in your packet a declaration of surplus vehicles for the coroner's office. There are two vehicles listed here, 2013 Chevy Tahoe, 2012 Ford Escape. We have a motion to approve this declaration. Mr. Hess, Mrs. Zucculo, seconds. Any questions on the declaration?
Do we know the mileage on these?
I don't know if I've got the mileage. Let's see. Eric, would you be able to speak to that?
The 2013 Tahoe is just shy of 100,000. The 2012 Escape is like 86,000, but it has mechanical issues and significant rust buildup. So that's why we're getting rid of them and replacing them with two 2019 Ford Explorers from the coroner's fees.
Thank you. Eric is, the slur. Are these going to the auction?
The trade-ins?
Yeah.
No, they were part of the trade-in.
The trade-in for the new vehicles.
For the new vehicles, right.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Any other questions? This is a roll call vote. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Legess? Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Altoff? Mr. Hess? Mr. Byrne? Ms. Weber? Mr. Payton? Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz? Ms. Haas? Ms. Zucolo? Mr. Dennell? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Is there any old business to come before the committee? Is there any new business to come before the committee? Seeing none, Mr. Legess, do you have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion.
Mr. Hess, and a third by Mr. Altoff. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, say aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries.